Thank you so much for coming to participate in this series the Middle has been hosting. Listen, learn, and lean into peace. I'm Jacqui Lewis. I'm the senior minister at Middle Church. You can see, if you see, I am African American. If you're sight challenged, woman of a certain age who is a Universalist Christian who really am heartbroken, is what I want to say, about all of the violence around the globe. But especially tonight, we're thinking about lands that I've been to and lands that many of us call holy, three Abrahamic religions, and people, human beings who are suffering and struggling and dying. And so our guest tonight is Amir Marshi. He is lots of things, an historian, a Palestinian, a Christian, an expert on being a Palestinian and also Zionist Christian theologies. And for some of you, that's a whole new term. We're going to talk about that some today. I'm so honored that he would come and spend some time. He's a professor, so he's in finals, and it's the season to be jolly, and we are not so jolly right now. But I'm just grateful that he would make time for this time with us. So Amir, welcome to this space. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jacqui, very much for hosting me. I'm honored to be here with you. And I just want to start by saying, may God have mercy over all of our martyrs, and may they rest in the peace and power. We are witnessing very, very dark times. We are suffering a lot of pain, and that pain is made worse by the lies, the amount of hiding and making of our suffering invisible. So I thank you again for hosting this space and for making the space for us to speak and not be voiceless anymore.
Thank you, Amir. Could we start with your we, like your us? Just tell us a bit about who you are. I mean, beyond my brief labels, like you are a human being who has people and a people, and just like, who's your we? Tell us about your us.
That's a very beautiful question. My we is Palestinians in Palestine, but we are at the end of the day human, and we are a part of one human community. But we are, as Palestinians, also deprived of the capacity to be fully human. So we all individually and collectively struggle against a world that denies us that possibility to be fully human. As not just us, of course, but this is what makes our experience unique to us. And myself, I was born in Nazareth, Palestine, a city that I hold very deep to my heart, a city that is unique biblically, but not just that. In many ways, I think, meeting a lot of American pilgrims coming to Nazareth, I had to confront this idea that to say to the Westerners that Nazareth, the history did not stop with Jesus. It actually continued, and it's a very living culture. It's still alive and vibrant, and its people still struggle like the people in the time of Jesus. And I've been there and studied at Catholic school, where I wasn't allowed to learn about my own history. It's against the law to learn about our own history. There's a Nakba law, the law of the Nakba. The Nakba is the term we use to speak about our catastrophe, our shared trauma that begins in 1948 with the expulsion of 800,000 Palestinians from Palestine. It continues to this day, which is why we call it the ongoing Nakba. We weren't allowed to learn about our own history. We learned about Christianity in a very broad sense, about Israel, about Zionism, about Europe, World War I, World War II, but who we are, we were not allowed to know. And so it is a task we take individually and collectively to educate ourselves as well as educating others about who we are. And that is the path of education that I took when I went to Tel Aviv University, for example, which is an Israeli university built on a displaced Palestinian village of Sheikh Mwannis, which was forcibly displaced in 1948. And me and colleagues had to investigate the ruins of that village, which is still being dispossessed. This university is still expanding its dorms and its parking space into the cemeteries and desecrating our history and depriving us to connect with our ancestors. And I went beyond and started my studies as a master's student at the Divinity School at the University of Chicago to learn more about the history and heritage of American imperial Christianity and how American empire has used Christianity to actually create the situation that we are living in, create and justify the situation where we are invisible, where our rights are relegated as secondary to the myth and idea of biblical restoration. And right now, I am a first-year PhD student at the University of Michigan in history and anthropology. I am a student of history. I am an expert in nothing. I am accumulating knowledge and trying to do my best to open people's eyes to truth and serve my people in trying to mobilize for justice.
Amir, can I take you back over a little of that? 1948, end of World War II, the Holocaust has happened. The world has watched. I'm going to use some 12-step language for just a second, like the world wants to make amends. The world wants to make amends. But there is an imperialist, Britain, Europe. There's a European solution to create a homeland for Israel. And there are people in the land. Can I just get you to just a little bit more say what that's like for Palestinians when that happens? 800,000 expulsed, the ongoing Nakba. Just say a little more about the stories of that, the part of that, the pain of that displacement.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jackson. Good question, Jacqui. To understand the Nakba, we actually need to go a little further back than the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a very important, but the British Empire promised Palestine to the Zionist organization in 1917 through what is known as the Balfour Declaration. At the time where it didn't really own it, at a time where it was planning to conquer it, and it did conquer it a year later. And this was the Zionist organization. This was not the Jewish people. These were not even European Jews. Most Jews, and up until then, up until the Holocaust, were not Zionists. Religious Jews specifically were not Zionists. Indigenous Palestinian Jews outright rejected Zionism, because Zionism, at the end of the day, is not the solution to white supremacy, to racism, to ethnic nationalism. It is the product of it. Herzl is the founder of Zionism in 1898, held anti-Semitic views. And you can see this all across his text. He wanted to assimilate Jews, European Jews at first, but then he realized that he can't do that. And so he integrated into the colonial enterprise of Europe and basically promoted the idea that Jews could be used by Europe, by European imperialism, to expand their conquest of the East. And the language that Herzl used was a colonial supremacist language. And I don't want to dwell too much on that because you asked me about the Nakba, but from 1918 to 1948, the British Empire kept giving rights and privileging the Zionist organization and its political institutions, its governmental institutions, its agricultural institutions, while depriving the same to Palestinians, who comprise 95% of the population. Palestinians who are Christian, who are Druze, who are Muslim, who are Baha'i, who are Jewish. We are a very diverse community, one of the most pluralist and most beautifully diverse communities. We're all deprived of any national recognition, of any collective rights. And we fought for it all around these years. And the British Empire stood as the, quote, iron wall of Zionism. I say iron wall, it's a very specific word used by Vladimir Zeev Jabotinsky, who wrote about the Iron Wall in 1923. He was a right-wing, today we call it right-wing, an ultra-nationalist Zionist who designed the military and legal doctrine for Zionism that is still carried out to this day and is used in Gaza today, which is that you need to crush native resistance. You need to crush native people and to crush the hope that they might have self-determination, to have their full rights in Palestine as native people. Because again, this is a colonial project, a settler colonial project, and this is the language that they used at the time. Jabotinsky, Herzl, David Ben-Gurion, they did not believe in the Bible. They were all atheists. And they were all part of the European colonial enterprise. They used the Bible as a historical document, sure. And the way they needed to do that, the way they wanted to implement their goal, which is to build a Jewish state as in a state only for Jews, a state that does not recognize anybody but Jews, was through gaining a demographic majority. But most Jews did not immigrate to Palestine. Most Jews rejected Zionism up until the Holocaust. And it was then that Jewish migration was being facilitated into Palestine. I'm saying facilitated because most Jews did not want to go to Palestine. Actually, the most prominent destination was the United States, and the United States rejected these migrants. So when Americans speak about their guilt and the guilt that drives them to support Israel, that's what they should be addressing. They should be addressing the history of American complicity with Nazism, American complicity that did not help Jewish people survive the Holocaust.
Right.
And in 1948, that was a result of a pre-planned idea to ethnically cleanse Palestine of all its inhabitants. David Ben-Gurion called it Plan Dalet, as in Plan D, which surrounded village by village in a very strategic way to push them, some into the sea and some into Lebanon and some into Jordan. Gaza, that we look at today, is 70% refugees from the 1948 Nakba. Jaffa, which was a beautiful city, one of the most culturally vibrant cities on the coast of the Mediterranean. People came from all across to work and to witness huge concerts. It was exporting oranges to the world in millions a year. I had 140,000 citizens all thrown into the sea, on ships, which put them in Gaza. So these people in Gaza, they have witnessed their own Nakba in 1948 and suffered since then, non-stop, by multiple massacres in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. And of course, after the siege in 2007, these refugees became inhabitants of a concentration camp, not just a refugee camp. Concentration camp in every sense of the word. They are deprived of basic human rights to mobility. Even the amount of food and calories was being calculated at some point. Gaza was not livable before October 7, by the way. People talk about October 7 as it's the beginning. Gaza has been witnessing a genocide since 2007 and massacres before that. The generation born in Gaza in the early 2000s has seen nothing but walls, but siege. It hasn't even had access to water. 33% of water was drinkable before October 7. 70% unemployment rates. Gazans were being left to die, abandoned by the rest of the world, which now is saying that they deserve this. It demonizes them, and it justifies their genocide. 90% of them are now displaced again. And this is a situation that we're talking about where they are all being branded as terrorists to justify this sick military doctrine that Israel has come up with. You know what they talk about when they talk about Gaza? Military experts talk about mowing the lawn because they know they can't crush Palestinians and crush their hope. What they know is that they can repeatedly just crush them with military might. That's the iron wall I was talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
So many wars. Like imagine being a 20-year-old right now in Gaza. You've witnessed the 2008 war, the 2012 war, the 2014 war, 2018 March of Return. All these wars have been recognized globally as being as witnessing basic indiscriminate violence against civilians because Israel uses collective punishment of civilians. This is being proved by any human rights organization you want to talk about. But the facts don't matter anymore because it's not about facts. And it's about this myth and this narrative that Israel represents some moral high ground that we can never reach, that we are less deserving of life and less deserving of human rights. And the media is, of course, helping in this. It's helping in this by rendering the myths that Israel is propagating as legitimate facts. I mean, the massacre, the genocide is being televised, and even then, we not only do not gain sympathy, again, we are demonized. And they say it's because we're violent. Well, think about the March of Return in 2018, when thousands of people every Friday went and confronted the siege in Gaza with their body, with no guns, no weapons, overwhelmingly unarmed people protested, peacefully protested the siege. They were confronted with sniper fire. Hundreds of kids were killed. Hundreds of people were killed. Many of them were kids. And those that were not killed, they had their knees shot off with these special bullets that blow up in your knees. And now, because they can't treat it in Gaza, are now amputated. So many amputees in Gaza right now. Disabled people were being shot at and killed also at the time. Everybody was losing hope. They had nothing to do. They are living an unlivable life, and they are trying to confront this with peace, and the world abandoned them. And now the world pays attention. Only now the world pays attention. And I have to ask myself why. And the answer is obvious, because the life of others matter more than our lives.
My heart is broken with you on that, Amir. It just says. Let's talk about American guilt. And I want to talk about American complicity. But like we are guilty and party to. We are. And I think that is an unholy cocktail, right? Like this place where we feel guilty and then we are not shifting ourselves. We're not shifting our psyche. We're over and over again traumatizing your people, and we traumatize the Jews too. I'm just going to say, look at us, equal opportunity trauma makers, United States. Let's talk about American guilt for a minute, and particularly I want to get us to just to be able to talk a bit about kind of Christian Zionism, right? Christian Zionism here. But first, guilt. What do you tell the young people in your life about American guilt? What do you want us to know about American guilt?
I think when we're talking about guilt, we have to address the question of guilt from what exactly?
Mhm,
Is it guilt from a certain event or action taken, or is it guilt from a certain structure of power, of discrimination and racial violence that exists and pervades Western societies and American society more particularly? The problem with how guilt is weaponized is that it has hyper focus on anti-Semitism in a way that uproots it and decontextualizes from the root of the violence, which is white supremacy.
mhm.
Anti-Semitism is an expression of white supremacy. So
Yes,
is Islamophobia. So
yes,
is anti-Black hatred. So
yes.
is anti-Palestinian hatred. All of these things are connected. And if you want to deal with the issue, you deal with the issue. You don't deal with its symptom on one of
Mm,
its symptoms.
mm, mm,
And Zionists and right-wing Zionists have taken advantage of this before the Holocaust, by the way. Multiple Zionists have worked with Nazis And Netanyahu today works with the neo-Nazis, the president of Holland, and the American Christian Zionists who are very clearly anti-Semitic and genocidal. Uh, Balfour himself, who I was talking about, was also Christian Zionist, but also anti-Semitic. He pushed for the 1904 Alliance Act, uh, which basically disallowed Jews from migrating into the Britain. And so the problem today with anti-Semitism is that it's rendered into like into two anti-Semitism: good anti-Semitism, Zionist anti-Semitism, exonerated, everything's fine, which basically sustains the issue of white supremacy, and then bad anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And this has been a propaganda that was heavily invested in the 60s and 70s. I don't know if you know, there was this hoax letter written by Martin Luther King saying that anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And it's very clearly, not him that wrote it. It was a hoax.
Yeah.
We can talk about Martin Luther King and whether he was a Zionist or not, probably was to an extent. But that letter in itself does not exist. And it has to do, again, with how Israel has taken advantage of every sense of guilt, every discourse of justice in order to justify its existence. So during the civil rights era in America, Israeli sovereignty, Jewish sovereignty in Palestine became synonymous with Jewish rights, Jewish civil rights. And that is the most anti-Semitic thing I can think about, because it's conflating the rights of a people, a culture, a religion with a nation state, a colonial nation state, but a nation state. And in my mind, there is no difference between that and saying that ISIS represents the faith and the rights of Muslims. Right? When we talk about people, we're not talking about nation states. And Israel has done that multiple times. Like right now, the ideology is that all European Jews are indigenous to Palestine because there's this discourse about indigenous justice and indigenous rights. And so now the idea is to render all Jews indigenous to Palestine and Palestinians being invaders and outsiders and settlers. Same with anti-Semitism, same with colonialism and anti-colonialism. In the 1940s, Zionism up until the 1940s used the language of colonialism. In the 40s and the 50s, anti-colonialism became, and decolonialism became the new hip thing. And so Zionists started using the decolonial discourse. But even at that time, Zionists did not respect Holocaust survivors and talked about them in very bad ways as being cowards, up until the Eichmann trials in the end of the 50s, when Israel started seeing an opportunity to take advantage of that by not holding, again, European anti-Semitism, European German racial supremacy accountable, but by holding one man accountable, Eichmann, and saying that Germany has paid its price. Literally, Germany gave Israel money and did not deal with, again, European anti-Semitism. And the problem is European white supremacy, and the problem is in Europe. It was never in Palestine. Of course, there were always indigenous Jews in Palestine, and there were like other indigenous religious groups in Palestine. We don't have anti-Semitism in Palestine. Jews have always been here. And other places in the Arab world, there have always been Jews in Iraq. They had before they were forced to move to Israel, they had a wonderful life. They were, I mean, I don't want to romanticize that there were always problems, but economically, in terms of culture, in terms of education, they held special place in Iraq, in Egypt, in Syria, historically very prominent communities, uprooted from their lives, where they did not deal with the anti-Semitism that Europe made Jews suffer. And we're placed in Israel, and now there is this idea that Israel represents all Jews. Well, Israel does not represent all Jews, and it did not want to represent all Jews. Ben-Gurion, the first founder of Israel, treated Mizrahi Oriental Jews as lesser than Ashkenazi Jews, especially Yemeni Jews. Ethiopian and other Black Jewish people are also not given full rights. There's a lot of evidence about Ethiopian women being sterilized
Huh.
Palestinians when they migrated. Yes, because again, it's the roots of Zionism is in racial supremacy and white supremacy, and the idea from the start was to make Jewish people fully white by making them, again, European Jewish people fully white by making them colonizers, but of course, always lesser than European white people, but always more than us Palestinians, who in many ways are the new Semites.
Hmm. Can I just say that back to you? Because I think that's um, Zionism created a whiter Jewish people that were better than Palestinians, but not as good as Europeans. I just reread Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste and saw the movie. So I'm like looking at these caste tropes, right? And in a way, and this is way oversimplified, people don't write me angry. In a way, the white supremacist project that is the same project that abetted the Holocaust is the same white supremacist project that silences, disappears, invisibilizes Palestinians, still doesn't think the Jews are good enough, y'all. But there's a utilitarian nature to this that if if the stuff blows up in Israel, Jesus is going to come again. Did you see how I did that? Can you help me say that better, Amir? Right?
I think you said it perfectly. And if we want to really make it clear, we can go back to Christian Zionism and how it imagines Jews, right? Because Christian Zionism has a long history, but it really comes into being as a political actor in the 19th century, where the idea was that firstly, the land of the Bible, Palestine, will be witnessing the end days. Secondly, Jews, the chosen people, have a dispensation, a special dispensation. They are exceptional. They are chosen by God to enact their role in the end times. But this is a Christian drama, a white Christian drama that Jews are designated and dispensed to play a role in at a time where, again, Jews were not Zionists. And this is a time of the expansion of British imperialism and other imperialisms that were competing over Palestine, but eventually the British are the one that won that competition. And it was also a time of religious revival, the Great Awakening
Yes.
in Britain and the US. And what it was known then was Christian Restorationism. And Christian Restorationism affected people like scholars, cartographers who painted an idea or drew an idea of Palestine that totally excluded Palestinian living communities and revived biblical communities and basically began our invisibilization. An important actor in there is Lord Shaftesbury. Lord Shaftesbury, prominent politician, but also fanatic Christian Zionist. Again, Christian Zionism is a term that did not exist then. Restorationist was the term. Was the head of the Palestine Exploration Fund, which was based in Palestine and studied Palestine archaeologically, cartographically, topographically, and hosted a lot of Americans actually who came to Palestine to study the land of the Bible. But of course, they were not concerned with the people of the land. They were concerned with this idea of Jewish restoration. And Lord Shaftesbury, he was the one that coined the phrase "a country without a people for a people without a country," which later became the Zionist ideology, a land without a people for a people without a land. But they literally made it into scientific fact through all this research, all these archaeological documents that were produced at the time that are used today by Israel to kick Palestinians out of their homes in Jerusalem, for example, and say, this is where David did this, or this is where David did that. That is the product of American and British scholarly work in the 19th century. But it took on a very specific also development into premillennial dispensationalism. It's a very complicated term by John Nelson Darby, who was prominent in Britain but then moved to the US. US, very fertile ground for that kind of thinking. Settler colonial America, America that began with the Pilgrims and the idea that North America was Zion, and the British Puritans were the Israelites, and the Native Americans were the Canaanites, right? That already existed there. And Christianity was used not just in that way. Of course, it was used to justify slavery and justify the oppression of Black people and justify Jim Crow laws. And so there's nothing special about Christian Zionism in that sense. There's nothing really inherently religious or biblical about it. It's just another imperial, colonial ideology that uses religion. And during that time, it was very successful in the American audience that, again, the white American audience predominantly, that was losing, a lot because of the emancipation of Black people, the end of the Civil War, and the end of the frontier. They already occupied all of America. And so they became obsessed with the land of the Bible, Palestine, through what Herman Melville at the time called the Holy Land Mania, right? A lot of Americans started going to the Holy Land as pilgrims, but also with their imagination, the dispensational imagination, as in like playing a role in facilitating the Jewish return in the end times. But they were a small player at the time. I don't want to dwell too much on that. That gets revived in the US only in the 60s. Up until 48, as we said, Britain was basically the sponsor of Zionism. After 48, it became America. America became the sponsor of Israel. And up until then, liberal churches became also, not just the fundamentalist churches, became also Zionists, also as a product of this post-Holocaust theology that wanted to basically answer for the crimes of anti-Semitism by being pro-Israel, right? Which, as we've established, is not the right way to go. But then after 67, something else happens. This is a time when America is expanding as an empire. In Vietnam, there's a huge war, right? And it looks at Israel that succeeds in 6 days to occupy all these different lands as this model, this military model of triumph. And so neoconservatives, right-wing people started to look at Israel as this model, and were kind of like started looking at it with worshipful glances. And it revived Christian Zionism in the US. A lot of those leaders like Pat Boone, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, all these known names that started to imagine the role in bringing about the end times through implementing full Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem and the West Bank. Why? Because the West Bank, that's the real land of the Bible, right? Up until then, up until 67, Israel was occupying the coastal areas that did not mean much in the Bible. But once it occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank, quote unquote, Judea and Samaria, it was a fulfillment of prophecy, right? So this combination of military power and biblical prophecy created this revival, which culminated in so many works and books and documentaries. If you know, Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, for example, became a documentary, very famous documentary that started to look for clues for the end times, and one of them being Israel occupying Jerusalem as a fulfillment, but also as a precursor for the building of the Third Temple, which means the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the most holiest site for Palestinian Muslims, which will bring about the Great Tribulation and basically an apocalyptic life, which only after which Christ will come back and 1,000 years of his kingdom will reign, right? And
His
this
kingdom will
affected,
reign. His
yeah,
kingdom will reign, but not for you, not for
yeah.
you Jews.
No, of course not. No, Jews, Christians will be raptured.
Yes.
Jews will become a part of this war against, well, the Soviet Union at the time. It was, and Arabs and other countries in Africa and whatever, according to Hal Lindsey. And then some of them will convert. And those that convert will also be raptured, but most will die and be killed. So, John Hagee and all these people, they're thinking of their support as something, that will be eventually lead to a Holocaust, to another Holocaust for the Jews. They are supporting a Holocaust for the Jews. And this is what Israel invests in. And who gets really affected by them is Reagan. Ronald Reagan not only is a fanatic Christian Zionist, he opens the space up for all these pastors to become political players. They come to the White House, give seminars and whatnot. They are given lobbying power. Actually, under the first 5 years, the 80s, 250 pro-Israeli lobbies begin to exist. The lobbying system in general begins to be very strong, and basically begin to have control over politicians, right-wing politicians, and then liberal politicians, but also over the populations, the mass media that they were utilizing. Television was very important. Televangelists, as we know, were very prominent, and so this idea became very prominent among people. And it coincided with the revival of religious Zionism. I mean, up until then, as I said, there was no religious Zionism. Zionism was secular, was atheist, but these fanatic religious Zionists came into being at that time. A lot of them came from the US.
Yeah.
Meir Kahane was a Brooklyn-born Jewish American who founded Kach, a very KACH, a very racist party, designated as terrorist party by the US itself. Um, and later also Baruch Goldstein. Baruch Goldstein, who committed a massacre in 1994 in Khalil, or known as Hebron, by killing about 120 people who are praying in the mosque in a holy day for them. And the response by Israel basically was to not only memorialize that massacre, was also to prevent Palestinians from going and pray even more, and we implement more restrictions and allow settlers to go into that mosque even more. Yeah, and these people are now dominating the government, like Ben Gvir, Itamar Ben Gvir is one of them. But yeah, what's important to say here is that in the US, this idea became very prominent among political elites, but also started seeping into the masses. So even Black churches, too, with the rise of Pentecostalism, began to witness this. And this is something, Jacqui, maybe you could talk about from your experience, actually.
I will. I want to. And I know that we are at time now. So I would love to, is there Amir, a book, a resource you can say for people who are curious about this that they could read?
Yeah, there are multiple books I can recommend. Let's start with the Melanie McAllister, who has multiple books that can expose you to American culture in general, and it's how it was shaped by American imperialism, specifically in the Middle East, but also a very good focus on religion, Black religion and white churches and Black churches. She's just published
Melanie
it
McCall.
last year,
Yeah.
actually.
We're
Um,
when we put this out, Amir, we're going to put, Ben's going to get some resources for you to put. We'll put this in the link, whatever, to the YouTube of this. I could talk to you for another 3 hours. And so I'm going to ask you to come back and speak with me. But I want to wrap with Amir by saying this. Thank you, Ben. The Kingdom of God Has No Borders. That's a great read. Y'all, this conversation, this is Amir, who is a Palestinian Christian, being a student in Michigan, okay? Whose heart is at home also. This story is about more than Jews and Muslims. This story is about human beings of many faiths. And this story is a story about imperialism and the way white supremacy hurts all of us. I want you to listen to this talk again, friends. And I want you to listen to the other talks and see what it is that you see, what happens to your heart. Let us be students of history and these stories that cause so much pain. And I want to believe that because these are stories, we can change the story, but we can't change it if we don't know. So Amir, I'm wishing you all the blessings for finals in this time. And grateful to you for this and would love for you to come back right after Christmas and talk with me some more. Can we coerce you to do that, to come be with me again?
Yes, of course, Jacqui. I'm honored now, and I'll be honored again to join you and your audience and to expand this conversation, so we can think together and be educated together. I'm also, as a Palestinian, also always being educated about my world, and so can also learn how to act morally in this world and learn what our real role is, not to bring about the end of the world, but to bring about a new world that is based on justice, and that justice cannot be done without Palestinians gaining the right of return, Palestinians gaining the right to go to their homeland and live a full, dignified life on it. Humanity will not be redeemed before that happens.
And that is the last most important word. Thank you. Thank you so much, friend.